UiPath Orchestrator. As an RPA developer, you've probably heard this over and over again. But what is Orchestrator? What is it for? What are the individual components within Orchestrator? How are these components related to each other? In this video I will explain you the most important components in Orchestrator in detail. We will go through all of these components. At the end of the video I will show you what steps have to be taken if you want to publish a process in Orchestrator, so that a process can be managed and scheduled through Orchestrator. If the topic is interesting for you, then please watch the video to the end. You will learn a lot about Orchestrator. And of course, as always, in a simple way. If you like to see more videos about UiPath, then please subscribe to my channel, if you haven't already. Let's start. At the beginning I will explain Orchestrator. What is good to know is that Orchestrator is a web application. But before I explain the Orchestrator content, I will first explain the word orchestrator. What does the word orchestrator mean? It comes from verb, orchestrate. Synonyms for orchestrate are coordinate, organize, manage, or arrange. This means that Orchestrator is responsible for managing, organizing and coordinating the robots. In general, Orchestrator is responsible for managing the processes implemented in UiPath Studio. This means, the process is implemented in UiPath Studio, and then managed in UiPath Orchestrator. I'm now going to talk about the Orchestrator content. What does each component mean? Let's first understand, what does a business process mean? A process consists of various steps that are to be carried out in a specific order, in order to convert an input into output. A process can be performed by humans, nature or machines using different resources. For example, we have the following process. We have to call different transactions in SAP system, and export reports as Excel files. At the end, we want to merge all these files together, to get one output file. This output file should be sent to a specific person. As you see, we have different steps, which should be carried out. We can perform this process manually, but we can also implement it in UiPath, so that a robot can perform this process by itself, without human intervention. Let's say we want to implement the process in UiPath. To do this, we need UiPath Studio. We have different types of UiPath Studio. These are Studio for RPA developers, Studio Pro for specialized developers. In the last releases we don't have Studio Pro anymore. UiPath Studio and UiPath Studio Pro have been merged. Studio contains currently all features from the Studio Pro. And the other type is Studio X for business users. Studio X can do many things similar to Studio, but it's made to be simpler to users, which don't have programming background. In UiPath Studio we have different activities, which we can use to automate a process. The automated process is called project, which contains the activities and also the libraries and dependencies. After implementing the process, we want to run the process every day on 10 a.m. for example. How to do this? We have to use UiPath Orchestrator. This means, we should have this implemented business process in Orchestrator. We can do this as follows. In UiPath Studio we can publish a project to Orchestrator. Here you have to click the Publish button in the menu. After clicking the button, this window appears. Here you have to enter the package name, if the project is new and you don't have any old versions. If the project already exists in the Orchestrator, you have to write the existing package name. If the package already exists in the Orchestrator, you can see the existing version in Orchestrator. And here you can see the new version, which will be published into Orchestrator. And below you can enter a comment for the change. For example, you added a new page into the project, you can write this as comment here. After that you can click on Publish button again, and the project will be published into Orchestrator. Once we publish the project, it will be stored in a package in Orchestrator. Let's summarize these steps. We have a business process. We implement the process in UiPath Studio. It called project. We publish this project to Orchestrator. This will be saved in a package. Package is the first component in Orchestrator. This means that packages in Orchestrator are to store the projects, which we implemented in UiPath Studio. We can publish a project from UiPath Studio and store it in packages, or we can upload the package manually to the packages in UiPath Orchestrator. The Packages page in Orchestrator displays all the projects, which are published from UiPath Studio or uploaded manually. For each package we can see 2 points. Versions and changelog. In the Versions tab we can see each version of this package, when is it published, and whether it's active or not. Active means that we use it currently. Inactive means this version is not in use currently. In the Change Log tab we can see more details about each version, for example, who published the package or also the comment we set once we publish the package. Change Log helps us to track the changes we've made. Let's now move to the next component. It's processes. A process in Orchestrator represents a package version. This means we can create a process in Orchestrator using a version of a package. For example, we have the package X, which has 3 versions. We can use one version of these to create a process. Here is the window, which appears once we want to create a process. The following information must be entered to create a process. First, you have to choose the package from the existing packages in Orchestrator. Then you can enter a process name. You can write anything here, for example process X. Then you have to choose the version of the package. Here each version of the selected package is listed in the drop-down list, and you have to choose one version. Then you have to select the environment. What does environment mean? I will talk about it later in the video. Then you can select a job priority. What does a job mean? I will also talk about it later in the video. Then you can add some description for the process. And below you can select the options, which meet your needs. For example, if your process contains input or output arguments, you don't have to select the first option. But if your process doesn't contain inputs or outputs, then you can select the option, Automatically Start Process. And the second option is to configure, if you want to stop process from the UiPath Assistant or not. If you select the option, you will not be able to stop the process from the UiPath Assistant. After adding this information, click on Create to create the process. Let's now move to the next component. It's machines. Machine is nothing but a workstation or computer, where the UiPath Assistant is installed. On the machine, the process should run later. This means that we define here where we want to run the processes. If you want to create a machine, you can choose between 2 options, Standard Machine or Machine Template. Machine Template enables connecting UiPath Robot for multiple accounts to Orchestrator using the same key. This means more than one account can use the same key. The key will be automatically generated after creating a machine. In other words, Machine Template is used when we want to create a key for more than one computer. This means that we don't have only one machine with machine key, but we have more than one machine, which work with the same key. Standard Machine enables you to connect the UiPath Robot to Orchestrator on one workstation only. The standard machine key is generated for a single workstation, with the same name as given to the standard machine. This is recommended if you want to restrict connecting the UiPath Robot to Orchestrator on a certain machine only, as it works in scenarios in which the machine name stays the same each time you connect to it. Let's see how to create a standard machine in UiPath Orchestrator. You have to enter the following information. First, you need to enter the computer name. How to get it? There are several ways to get the computer name. For example, you can open PC Info and get the computer name from there. Then you can add a description for the machine. After that, you have to enter the count of unattended runtimes, and also the count of the non-production runtimes. What do these mean? I will talk about the both later in the video. After that, you should click on the button Provision. Once you clicked on this button, a machine key will be generated. This you need to connect the UiPath Robot on your machine with the UiPath Orchestrator. This means machines are to connect the UiPath Robot and UiPath Orchestrator with each other. Let's see how to connect your computer with Orchestrator. You have to open UiPath Assistant and navigate to References, and then to Orchestrator Settings. Here you have to enter the following information: your machine name, which is automatically filled in. If not, then you have to enter it. It's the same as computer name, which you entered in Orchestrator while creating the standard machine. Then you have to enter the Orchestrator URL. And the last one is the machine key, which is generated after creating the machine. After you entered the information, click on button Connect, and you will be connected to UiPath Orchestrator. Let's move to the next component. It's robots. The UiPath Robot is the execution host that runs processes implemented in UiPath Studio. In Orchestrator, the robot object represents the image of the UiPath Robot and helps define its capabilities and access to Orchestrator resources. In other words, the UiPath Robot is like an employee. This employee has certain tasks that he can and is allowed to carry out. This employee also has access to only specific information. There are 2 kinds of robot: standard robot and floating robot. Floating robots are robots that enable users to use UiPath Robot on multiple computers. This means that the robot is not tied to a specific machine. With one named user license, one user can use UiPath Robot on a maximum of 3 machines at a time. But the user has to log out from a machine to use the other machine. A standard robot restricts the user to use UiPath Robot on a single workstation. This means that the robot is tied to a specific machine, namely the one set when creating the standard robot in Orchestrator. Standard robots work only for users who always work on the same machine, or whose name stays the same each time the user connects to it. Let's see how to create a standard robot in UiPath Orchestrator. We have to enter the following information. First, we need to select a machine. In the drop-down list, we can see all machines, which we have in UiPath Orchestrator. We can select one of them. Then we have to set a name for the robot. Then we can add a description for the robot. After that, we have to select a robot type. We have 6 different types. I will talk about them in the next part. The last thing we have to enter is the username and the domain. These are for the machine, which we normally use to log into our workstation or computer. We can also set some settings for the robot in the Settings tab, like the screen resolution or the logging level. I will talk about logs and logging in this video later. After we entered the information and selected the settings, we can click on Create to create the robot. Let's now talk about the robot types. We have the following 6 types. These fall into 2 categories: build and run. Build robots are to implement the business processes. As I already mentioned, we have 3 types: Studio, Studio X and Studio Pro. But as also already mentioned, in the new releases from UiPath, we don't have Studio Pro anymore. Only Studio and Studio X. The other category, Run, is to run the processes. Here we have these 3 types. Attended robots, these can be executed on the machine by human. They act as the personal assistant of end users. Attended robots run under human supervision. An example for these robots is to export a report from a system. Here the end user has to enter his credentials to log in into the system, then the robot can enter the information in the system to create the report. Attended robots are best suited for smaller, more fragmented tasks. We can also define the Studio and Studio X as attended robots. Unattended robots are autonomous robots that don't require human supervision to execute jobs. Unattended robot is intended for complex and highly repetitive tasks, usually needing to be performed in batches, that can be decided based upon a predefined rule. Non-production robots can be executed in unattended mode, for development purposes only. One last thing you should know about the robots is the robot status. In Orchestrator you can manage the robots and see their statuses. There are 4 statuses. These are available. This means that the robot is not running a process and is free to be used. It's like an employee who has a break now. Busy. This means that the robot is running a process. Unresponsive. UiPath Robot and Orchestrator have not communicated in the last 2 minutes. Disconnected. The UiPath Robot has no connection to the Orchestrator. This happens, for example, if the machine is offline. Let's move to the next component. It's environments. An environment is a grouping of robots that is used to deploy processes. This means each environment contains at least one robot or more. Each robot in this environment has access to each process in this environment. Let's explain the environments using an example. We have a department. In this department we have different teams. In one team of these, there are 3 employees, which are doing the same tasks every day, for example creating reports. So an environment is the group of these 3 employees, who creates the reports. In other words, the environment is like a room, where these employees work, and also where all information they need is there. Each employee in this room has access to this information. The information is the processes. Each employee in this room can run these processes. Why we use environments? It's to help us to define which robots has access to which processes. That's all about environments. The next component is the queues. What does a queue mean? A queue is a container that enables you to hold an unlimited number of items. Queue can be understood as a to-do list. This list contains all the tasks that need to be done. In UiPath we can use the queues to store information that we want to use later. For example, we have a process that extracts data from invoices. We should later enter this data in an Excel file. We can use a queue here to store the data we've read from the invoices. Then we fetch the information from the queue and enter it into Excel. What is the difference between queues and transactions? Queue is the container, which contains the queue items. These queue items are called transactions. This means that queue contains transaction items. How to add items into queue? We can do this in UiPath Studio. There are 3 different activities to do it. The first one is add queue item. This activity adds only one queue item into queue. Add transaction item adds also only one item into queue, but there is a difference between the both activities. I will talk about the difference in the next part. The third activity is bulk add queue items. Using this activity we can add one or more queue items at once. For example, we have a data table, which contains all queue items. We can use the data table in this activity to add all these items into queue. What is the function of the queue? Why we use queue? Queues help us to monitor the tasks executed by the robot. This means, as mentioned before, queue is a to-do list. Using the queue we can define what to do and then check how is the task done. This means we can check whether the task is successfully executed or not. For each transaction there are different statuses. These are: new status means that the item has been loaded into the queue, but has not yet been processed. In progress means that the item has been picked up from the queue and is currently being processed. Successful means that the item was processed successfully. Failed means that the item ran with an exception. There are 2 types of exceptions in UiPath. Either business exception or application exception. Retried means that the item has been repeated. This means that item has already been processed, but was unsuccessful, so this item will be processed again. Abandoned means that the item remained in the new status for a long period of time, approximately 24 hours, without being processed. Deleted means that the item has been deleted from the queue. Let me now explain to you what the life cycle of a transaction item looks like using an illustration. We start by adding an item to the queue using the add queue item activity. The item gets the status new. Then we want to fetch the item from the queue and process it. We do this using the get transaction item activity. The item gets the status in progress. As already mentioned, we can also load a queue item into queue using the add transaction item activity. If we load a queue item into queue using this activity, the item directly gets the status in progress. This is the difference between the both activities, add queue item and add transaction item. Assume the item is now processed. Either the item has been processed successfully. In this case, the item gets the status successful using the activity, set transaction status. So the item is finished and there is nothing more to do. Or the item has not been processed successfully. In this case, the item gets the status failed. In the queue settings there is the possibility to retry failed items. You can specify whether item may be retried and how often. This means that after the failed status, a check is made as to whether the items in this queue may be retried or not. If retry is not allowed, then the item is finished and will no longer be processed. But if retry is allowed, the item gets the status retried. The third status for the items that had status in progress is abandoned. This means that an item has remained in the status in progress for up to 24 hours without getting either status successful or failed, therefore this item is set as abandoned. In this case, it is also checked whether the item may be retried or not. If the item is set as retried, the item is copied and reloaded into the queue. The new item gets the status new. The new item is then processed again as already described. We also have the option to delete items from the queue. We can do this with the delete queue items activity. Or we can also delete the queue items manually in the orchestrator. We can delete all items, except items that have status in progress. Let me now explain to you how you can add an item into queue. As mentioned before, you can add items using one of the 3 activities, add queue item, bulk add queue items, and add transaction item. I will explain the activity, add queue item. If you want to add a queue item, you can add some configurations for the added queue item. The most important configurations are these 4. Deadline. Postpone. Reference. Priority. Deadline is the date before which the queue item should be processed. This means that this queue item should be processed before this date, else this item will not be processed. Postpone is the date after which the queue item may be processed. This means that this queue item should be first processed after this date. Before this date, you cannot fetch the item from the queue. Reference is a text of the added queue item. This is like an ID for the item. Using this ID you can fetch a specific item from the queue, which has this ID as reference. Priority is the priority level of the queue item. We have 3 priorities for a queue item: high priority, normal priority, and low priority. This means that the high queue items have higher priority than the other priorities, and should be processed before them. Now you know how to add a queue item. Let me explain to you how these items will be fetched from the queue. To get a queue item from the queue, you need to use the activity getTransactionItem. To get an item, you have 2 options. Either you get the item using the reference. Here you have to enter the reference of the item you want to fetch. As a result you will get the specific queue item, which has this reference. Else you can get the item without entering the reference. In this case, the robot will fetch the queue items using the principle of FIFO. FIFO means first in first out. This means the robot will fetch the queue items using the loading date. This means we will always get the first item loaded into queue, then the next item loaded into queue, and so on. But here you have to differentiate whether the items have the same priorities or not. If all items have the same priority, then they are picked up one after the other, depending on which item was loaded into the queue first. However, if the items have different priorities, then the high priority items are fetched first, then the normal priority, and finally the low priority. Of course, the FIFO principle also applies here. This means that from all high priority items, the item that was first loaded into the queue is always fetched first. And then from all normal priority items, we will get first the oldest item, and so on. That's all about the queues. The next point is triggers. What does a trigger mean? Why we use triggers? Triggers are to configure the processes when they should be executed by the robot. As I already mentioned, a robot is like an employee. The trigger is to tell this employee when he has to run the process. There are 2 kinds of triggers: time trigger or queue trigger. Time trigger means that we set a time when the process should be executed. For example, run the process every day on 10 a.m. Queue trigger means that the process should be executed once we have a new queue item. This means we have a process running now and has created a new queue item. The other process is triggered to run once a new queue item is created. Here you have to define which queue is it. Let's see how to create a trigger in Orchestrator. First you have to choose if time trigger or queue trigger. Let's say we want to create a time trigger. First we can enter the trigger name. Then you have to select the process which you want to trigger. Once you selected the process, you have to select which robot has to run the process. After that you can enter the parameters, if there are any input or output parameters for the process. Then you can set the time. Here you have different options. Either you select one of the standard functions, or you can use advanced option. This option gives you more possibilities to configure your trigger. This option works using the cron expressions. If you don't know cron expressions and how to set an expression, then you have to watch the video, cron expressions, on my channel. I explain the cron expression in details there. Then you can select stop jobs after, if you want to stop the process after a specific time, if the process is still running. This means, for example, your process should not run longer than 1 hour. Here you can select this option and set the time as 1 hour. In this case, the process will be stopped after 1 hour if the process is still running more than 1 hour. This can be used to make sure that the process is running okay and doesn't block the next processes, which should be run on the same machine. The last option is to disable the trigger at a specific time. For example, we set the trigger every day, but we want to run the process only this week. So we can select this option to disable the trigger after 1 week. At the end you can click the button Add to create the trigger. The next point is jobs. What does a job mean? A job represents the execution of a process on a UiPath robot. This means, for example, we set a trigger every day on 10 a.m. On 10 a.m. the trigger starts a job. This job is the execution of the process, which we triggered in the trigger. If we take the same example on employees, the job means that the employee is currently doing the task. The employee is the UiPath robot and the task is the job. On the jobs page in Orchestrator we can manage the jobs. Here we have 4 different options. The first one is to stop the job. This means Orchestrator sends a stop request to UiPath robot. The process should contains the activity, should stop. The robot still executing the process until he reacts the stage, should stop. In this case, the robot stops the execution. The second option in Orchestrator is to kill a job. This means that the job will be immediately stopped. The third option is to resume a job. This can we use if the job is paused. In this case, we can resume the execution of the job. The last option is to restart the job. Maybe we need to run a job again, so we can restart it using this option. We can also see the job logs. But what do logs mean? This is the next component in Orchestrator. Logs are information about the events, process status or transactions. These are for problem analysis, or for the reconstruction of transactions. There are different logging levels in Orchestrator. These are trace, info, warn, error, fatal. There is no rule how to use them. You have to set a standards for you, how you want to use them. You can log your process using the activity, log message. These levels are ordered from trace to fatal. This means, if you set the logging level for your robot as trace, you can see all logging levels in the logs. But if you set the logging level for the robot as error, you can only see the error and fatal logs in Orchestrator. The next point is the assets. What does an asset mean? How to use it? Why we use assets? Assets usually represent shared variables or credentials that can be used in different projects. We use assets to provide an extra level of security. For example, we can store the credentials for a system in assets. These are then encrypted. In this way, we don't need to set the credentials directly in the process, because this is not secure. Another use for the assets is to store information, which could be changed by time, such as email address. For example, we want to change an email address, which we use in the process. In this case, we can change the value directly in the assets. Using assets, we don't need to publish the process or doing anything more. But if we don't use assets in this example, we need to change the email address in the project, then we need to publish it. After that, we have to update the version of the process, etc. Using assets in this case saves time and effort. There are 4 types of assets, which we can use in Orchestrator. These are text, to save a string variable; bool, to save a Boolean variable; integer, to save a number variable; credential, to save credentials for a system or mailbox. Here we can save the username and password. How to read the assets in the project? We can do this using the activities, getAssetActivity, to read the values of the types, text, integer, and bool; getCredentialActivity, to read the username and password from the type, credential. Now let's move to the next 2 components in Orchestrator. These are Tenant and Folders. Tenant is to isolate data, with only one instance of Orchestrator. This feature facilitates automating different departments from your company, and ensures the desired authorization of Orchestrator data per department. A folder is a storage area that helps keep your projects separate. Let's understand the both components using an example. Let's say we have the company X. This company has different departments, like finance, production, IT, etc. Each department has different teams. For example, finance has controlling and accounting teams. IT has programming and maintenance teams. If we want to use Orchestrator for this company, we can use it so. For each department we create a tenant. This means, we create finance tenant, production tenant, IT tenant, etc. Using the tenant ensures the authorization per department. This means, that each department has specific configurations and authorizations, which are not visible for the other departments. And for each team we create a folder. This means, controlling team has a folder, where all projects are stored and managed. Using folders helps us to manage the projects per team. Let me summarize what I explained in this video. I will discuss the summary using a company example. We have different departments in the company. Each department is a tenant. There are different teams in each department. Each team is a folder. There are different rooms for each team. A room is an environment. The team consists of different employees. These are the robots. These employees have specific tasks that can only be done by them. These tasks are performed on the computer. The computer is the machine and the tasks are the processes. To better manage the process and check the results, the employee uses a to-do list. There are several items on this list. The list is the queue, and the items are the transactions. Each employee has to run the process in a specific time. That means, the employee should run the process on a specific time. While the employee is running the process, it means that a job is in progress. The employee writes notes while executing the process. These notes are the logs. The employee uses help tools or help functions, such as the shortcut for copying text. These help tools are the assets. I hope you could understand the Orchestrator components better now. There's just one more thing I would address in this video. What steps I have to do if I am new to Orchestrator and want to publish, schedule and monitor a process? In this part I will explain to you the steps, which you have to do. These steps you need to do in the same order. First you need to create a machine. After creating the machine, a machine key will be generated. Then you have to create a robot. For this robot you need to select the machine. Here you can select the machine, which you already created. After that, you can connect your robot with UiPath Orchestrator using the machine key and the machine name. Then you have to create an environment. In this environment you have to choose a robot or more. Here you can select your robot, which you already created. After that, you have to create a process. To create a process, you need a package. This package is your project, which you created in UiPath Studio and published to Orchestrator. Using this package, you can create the process. You need to select a version of the package. And also you need to select an environment. Here you can select the environment, which you already created. At the end you need to create a trigger. To create the trigger, you need to select a process and the robot. In this way, you can use Orchestrator to manage this process, and run it automatically as triggered. For each process you can do the same steps. Now we are at the end of this video. I hope you learned UiPath Orchestrator in a simple way with me. If you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to write me back. Have a good day and wait for the next video on my channel.